Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Scottish, Full Scottish. We're back after a short New Year break. I'm joined today by my guests, there's Professor Alison Phipps and Christopher McEleny, who's the leader of Inverclyde Council. So we've got a list of ever more hair-raising topics to discuss today, but we're starting off with the continued Brexit fiasco.
Yeah.
So I haven't really been able to keep up with what's been going on in the news regarding Brexit progress or lack of it. And I see that the Irish are preparing for a no deal. Do you think that's becoming more likely?
Well, I think it's just a case of the more things change, the more they just stay the same. And if 2018 moves into 2019, and it looks like we're back to where we started last year. The meaningful vote's going to happen allegedly at the end of January, but I guess we're going to be asking ourselves, did anything meaningful actually happen after that vote? And I think it's interesting, Angus Robertson has started commenting again in a weekly Sunday piece he's got, and he's been highlighting just the impact that small nation states have on a European stage, which is quite interesting because at the moment countries such as Ireland and Austria have more influence on the European and global stage than Scotland does, and certainly even more than the United Kingdom. I think that's just a preamble into what Brexit's going to look like. Just what sort of influence are we going to have in terms of trade and jobs and influence in the world as we see it after Brexit? I don't think a lot.
I was reading through Christmas cards and Christmas letters yesterday as I was beginning to take them down in the house, and a lot of them for me come from all over the world because my work is very globally based, and I lived in Germany and in France in my youth, and so I receive these beautiful letters from around the world, and they're often in other languages, and all of them saying the same thing. We are just watching what is happening in the UK, and we can't believe it, and we're terribly sad, and we really hope this isn't going to mean something different for our friendship. And so what's happening in the Parliament in Westminster and what is being debated in the devolved areas of the UK is kind of replicating itself in these letters that I've been reading over, and the kind of the fear and the fractiousness of social media, and that replicates itself as well in the press, I think just is pointing to so many different levels where people are just worried about what Brexit's going to mean for those that they care about and love, and who have been friends and family for a long time or colleagues for a long time. So I think, for me, I kind of see the politics, but I also kind of feel that other politics, the politics of the home and the politics of our relationships. And just as people are saying, I'm so sorry this is happening to us. I'm so sorry it's going to be so much harder for us to meet and sit down and maybe have a coffee or a drink together in future because we live in different countries. So that aspect is that's really kind of settled into me over the last couple of days as I've really thought, this is it. This is the year 2019, 29th of March, and everything that I've known really for my formative life is about to be over, and that's really focusing my mind and thoughts in very different ways, both in terms of anger and frustration. I did not vote to leave. Like many people in Scotland, I voted to remain, but at the same time also just being very concerned about the ways that this then impacts on everyday life and the things that we do with people we care about.
I mean, we now have, am I correct that it's official government advice being given out to NHS patients regarding ensuring that their local pharmacy is stocked up with the medications that they may need?
It's a complete shambles. I think the statistics tell you that 73% of the population of the United Kingdom didn't vote for Brexit.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point, because obviously you've got a plebiscite happens, you've got an electorate, you've got people that actually turn up and vote, and the key point is it's important to vote, because if you don't vote, this is what happens. But 73% of the country that don't want something is a large, very, very large number. And I think the government actually need to take cognizance of the fact that this was an advisory, non-legally binding referendum. And when all the dust settles, with an absolute shambolic period turning up to negotiations with Europe without any paperwork, any demands, we still haven't even started the negotiations with the rest of the world in terms of how post-EU trade will look like. I think it's a really, really interesting point for the SNP. in the next 2 months what our position is going to be, because I think we should be making a clear point that, well, you know, it's pretty clear that the people don't have a consensus in this country what they want. I think there's a consensus in Scotland that we want to stay in the European Union, but across the United Kingdom that consensus is non-existent. And I think that means one thing: status quo. We should basically make any measure possible to cancel Brexit. But I say cancel Brexit, but of course Brexit hasn't happened. We're still a member of the European Union. The Scottish Six won a historic legal landmark that basically says we can revoke Article 50, and I think the sensible approach, a sensible government, would be revoking Article 50, and we can go back to the people in a general election sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think, you know, I was just doing the sums on my sheet here and thinking, you know, so 29th of March, so that gives us about 86 days before we are supposedly leaving the European Union, so that's about 60 working days, give or take. So really, it doesn't feel like it's enough time to sort out all the many levels of work and issues that we've really got to try and tackle by that time. I find myself, there's all kinds of really weird things that I find myself interested in. I was listening to the president of the Road Haulage Association for the first time in my life a couple of days ago. You know, a measured, sane, professional man speaking about his concerns and saying quite extraordinary things, that business does not know what to do because we still aren't at a point where we know what a deal is or what it will be or what it will mean. And that being replicated across many other industries. The Department of Transport for the UK government tweeting out, you know, if you're going to be out of the country on the 29th of March, you know, don't worry, you'll probably be able to get back. And I'm finding myself not filled with confidence at the moment. I haven't watched a negotiating procedure that fills me with confidence, and the fact that these are statements being put out by our government saying, you know, well, it's okay, you'll probably still be able to have bananas and tomatoes. These things which then become presenting issues, they're the things that people start to focus on, rather like the ferries have become a thing to focus on, where everyone's a little bit unsure and unstable because the way things have been is not how it looks like things are going to be in the future.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think I am out of the country on the 20th of March, so perhaps not getting back in would be a blessing in disguise. But I think there's a really, really good lesson for the United Kingdom here, in that the old saying that the sun never sets on the empire. But just before Christmas, we had the president of Luxembourg basically putting the United Kingdom in its box when he was being probed to what more can you do, and he says, well, with all due respect, you asked for Brexit, we didn't ask for you to leave the European Union, so don't come back and ask us for a better deal because you don't like the deal we're giving you. And I think then that's a really, really stark lesson for the Labour Party, because they're still propagating an argument that if we have a general election and you return a Labour government, we'll go and get you a better Brexit deal. But the European Union and the Commissioner have been absolutely clear, there's not going to be another deal, this is the deal. So I think that actually, I suppose for a UK point of view, what's the point of a general election? Because effectively you've got the Labour Party and the Tories, and both of them have the exact same policy on Brexit. Labour, of course, have got a very smart flowchart policy, and it depends what part of the country you go to. They can say, well, we believe there should be a common market, but if they go to a Brexit part of the country, they'll say, no, we think we should be out of the single market, but there should be some sort of consensus and some sort of market. So their positions all over the place. And I think from a Scottish perspective, we need to start asking ourselves, is it our responsibility, is it our job to save England from England itself, or is our responsibility not to take cognizance of the fact that the people of Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, and public opinion now tells us that a majority of people in Scotland would rather become an independent country in the EU than stay part of the UK with a no-deal Brexit. And it'd be interesting in the weeks to come to see what the figures are for any sort of Brexit, because I think reality is Brexit means a no-deal Brexit.
And there is also, I think, within all of this, in some ways, Brexit, it remains a presenting issue of deeper malaise within our own democratic systems. And I think, again, those contrasts between areas where we have proportional representation and the ability to vote in Scotland according to a list system and a constituency system, and where we have to work in coalition, so we have to work our democracy in such a way that we have to debate issues. We have to learn to disagree. It isn't the same adversarial politics that you get in a first-past-the-post system. And what, again, I think we're seeing Brexit revealing is those real fractious, broken points within our democratic system in the UK, and that a first-past-the-post system isn't able to deliver a consensus for us. It's delivering a divisiveness that is really quite frightening for a lot of people, and that has produced levels of discourse in public society which are xenophobic, are racist, at times are deeply misogynist, and that our political system doesn't seem to be able to find a way to gather that back together within the United Kingdom. So we're actually looking at a time where Brexit is showing us we need a different way of doing politics, of being able to disagree with one another, of actually acknowledging that we are always going to live together as human beings with things we like and things we don't like, things we agree on, things we don't agree on, and finding a way forward that can mean that we can continue to live in peace with one another is important. And again, the EU was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for having kept the peace over the years through really deep democratic work with its citizenship. And if you just think about the experiences many people, the majority of people have been able to have of projects within their constituencies, within their cities, within their villages, within their towns, which have been funded by European money, which might be road building projects, they might be extra money around hospitals, it might be just youth exchanges with schools, all that work that's gone on for years, many different projects at the level of the arts, at the level of learning languages, all of those things which help us both connect with one another, but also encounter one another's difference. All of those things then actually enable us to live together better and to live and understand each other's differences. And also to just be more interesting because there's a diversity there. And what really, I think, at bottom worries me about the vision that seems to be coming with a UK in Brexit is one of closure, of fear, of keeping out things that might actually make us a little more interesting, exciting, diverse, quirky, all those things about eccentricity that have always been part of the British character. I really am concerned for the loss of those as we close ourselves in.
Do you not think Brexit has exposed that there's a real lack of wisdom in UK politics at the moment? This is the feast of the Epiphany, when the three wise men visited the baby Jesus, and I think if you look at UK politics, you would struggle to find three wise people across the entire spectrum at a UK level. And we've got Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and I think if you asked anyone on the street to name his three frontbenchers for the official opposition, you would get Jeremy Corbyn, you'd maybe get McDonnell, but there's a real absence of real political leadership at the moment, and I think that's why, come back to the Scottish perspective again, that's why I think that people are actually looking to the SNP for leadership, because Nicola Sturgeon has been the only true leader in this whole Brexit shambles going forward. And really when you think on it, you've got a Prime Minister that campaigned wholeheartedly that we should remain in the EU, and she put all these arguments for 18 months forward as the Home Secretary for why that was the answer, and all of a sudden it's no longer what they believe in. I think people just look at that and they think this just sums up why politics is broken. You've got the Labour Party who again campaigned to remain in the EU, albeit I wouldn't say it was wholeheartedly, but all of a sudden now they think we can make I think they refer to a people's first, jobs first Brexit. It's just platitudes that mean absolutely nothing. There is no jobs first Brexit. Brexit's going to be an absolute disaster. A no deal Brexit will cost the Scottish economy something like 80,000 jobs. So I think they should come back this time next year and tell people what a jobs first Brexit means when people are going to dole queues. As you said earlier on, you've got people's relatives queuing up for prescriptions because, let's face it, pharmacies can't stockpile prescriptions. There's going to come a point if we don't get a deal in place that this could happen, and I think that might lead us on to the next conversation in terms of some of the other shambles that we'll be seeing.
Yes, the ferry companies, the ferry and the contracts, Seaborne Freight UK, who have been awarded a £14 million contract.
And the rest. And for me, is that the start of what Brexit means? The old-fashioned jobs for the boys. What we've basically got here is we've got a UK government cabinet secretary who's unilaterally awarded a contract to a ferry company who actually, when you look at it, aren't actually a ferry company. They're a shelf company that don't mean anything. They've got something like £500 or £600 in their accounts. They're not even big enough to have lodged accounts anywhere. No. Who are this company? Who are the directors of this company? And more importantly, what are the relationships between the board members on that company and the government? Yeah. What is that money actually getting spent on? And I think that asks and opens up a whole minefield of questions. Yeah. And it's only something like 30 years since we had one of the biggest maritime disasters on that shipping lane. And the HSE at the time were very, very critical. But yep, there was human errors involved, and that led to the loss of life. But actually the main problem was corporate governance and leadership. The directors of the company didn't understand the health and safety implications of what it meant to actually put vessels on the shipping lane between the United Kingdom and France. Yeah. And we're being asked to believe that in under, as you said, 50 working days, we're going to have a bona fide ferry company up and running. It's actually quite offensive, and I think people need to be actually alarmed. What does that mean going forward for Brexit? Is that what we're going to be asked to put up and keep and deal with?
And I think there's something really important in what you've just said there about things like health and safety regulations. And I read a really lovely column by Ian McWhirter in between Christmas and New Year, where he was saying, let's just look at all the things in the world that have got better. And one of the things he focused on in that was what health and safety regulation and legislation has done. And a lot of the time we hear people going, this is health and safety gone mad. But actually, there is real wisdom, to use that word you used before, Chris, in saying we will think seriously about security. The trade union movement was built around trying to stop the number of industrial accidents at work, put a huge amount of work into that, where we actually saw people as expendable to profit. Worldwide, when we're actually looking at trade deals and trade agreements, and we're looking at countries that do not implement good health and safety legislation, we're seeing that in those areas you have far more fatalities. And so, as a maritime country, where our own cultural imaginary, if you think about the folk songs of Scotland, so many are laments for people lost at sea. So much of our cultural imaginary is around the role that the sea plays, is around the people that leave on the boats or arrive on the boats. It's really, it's not been a long time in historical terms that we've been able to fly in and out of airports. Before that, it was just the boats. And so it doesn't really surprise me that suddenly here we are, focusing on boats, that boats and the Channel, both these ghost ferries that don't exist and this company that hasn't got ferries, but also the wider question of boats crossing the Channel and bringing people who are seeking asylum, that these have then suddenly really risen in this panicking imaginary, this cultural imaginary of the people of the United Kingdom. And there are many, many questions I think we can ask around, it reveals the shambolic questions of governance, but it also, I think, raises other questions like, what are these ferries for? What is the deal that these ferries are in place to actually start to address? What is going to be transported?
Our trade is going to be increased with Brexit.
There's the question of why did it take over 2 years for the UK government to realise that we live on an island? Would be the first question I would perhaps ask. Why is it basically a judgment day? For, as you said, 55 days until Brexit, but we've realised all of a sudden we need these ferries. And a very good point. Surely you would only need more ferries if you're going to increase trade, but I don't see any forecasts that are happening. So what is the real reason for why all of a sudden we need to be dredging rivers that have not had vessels sailing in them for decades? What's the real reason that all of a sudden former RAF runways are now getting cleared for HGVs? And I think it's because there's a realisation that it's a very, very, very real prospect that this could be a shambles and things could ground to a halt. You're talking about miles and miles worth of queues, you're talking about haulage companies basically sitting parked on motorways not going anywhere, because if we don't get a proper deal that can basically allow trade to go from the United Kingdom into the continent, ferries are just going to basically sit and they're going to be at a standstill. Which kind of makes a point about the backstop, which is why I think it will be a no-deal Brexit. The backstop basically means that we stay in the European Union, because effectively you could have a ship from Greenock that goes into Belfast, that's the backstop, it berths in Belfast and it just leaves again and goes into the continent. So effectively we're still in the European Union, and I think that's why the DUP, they're certainly not going to, and I think that's actually a good thing, but that's why the DUP, they're not going to support this deal. And that basically means the parliamentary arithmetic just isn't there, and it's going to be a no-deal Brexit, which is a big worry, because we're already seeing the xenophobia with the Home Office's campaign. You get people that have lived in Scotland for 50 years, they've had a family in Scotland, they've got children in Scotland, and they've been asked to pay money to stay in Scotland. They've been asked to fill in a form.
Suffering from a lot of stress
Absolutely.
through the uncertainty.
I just think lots of people think, well, you know, what's the big deal? But you look at like the rape clause. What's the big deal about making someone that's been raped fill in a 7-page form so they can get a benefit? And I think, well, it is a big deal if you've lived here, you've contributed to the economy, you've raised a family in this country, you're as Scottish as anyone else, and all of a sudden you're being asked to prove that you're worth. And I think if you're looking at the small print on that, it's not a guarantee. You're making an application that someone ultimately has to approve. And if you look at the Windrush scandal, well, these were people that were promised they could stay in this country regardless, and they were sent back home to Jamaica and the West Indies. So I think we live in a country, unfortunately, the United Kingdom, that has decades and centuries of a track record for turning its back and reneging deals to people, and that's something I'm sure people in Scotland are worried about.
Sorry, I'm quite upset by a few of the things that get said, you know, because I know that the European people living here at the minute are very distressed about with the uncertainty, and a lot of
200,000 people.
Yeah.
We're talking about.
Yeah. But it's been the ongoing uncertainty and the hope for something.
I mean, I see it on a daily basis. The team of people that I lead at the University of Glasgow. There are only 2 of us who are UK citizens, the rest, because in order to really think the deep questions that affect people, which is the job of an academic, it's the job of universities to teach people to think about questions that are too difficult to think about on your own, and to really do that big thinking that'll bring breakthroughs and bring other streams of thinking. To do that, we need to think with people who come from very different places in the world, who have very different systems. If you only ever think with the same set of literatures, the same set of ideas, you won't make any progress. You won't be able to see your way through. Whereas if you put things together and allow a creativity to emerge, then something else happens. And I just watch my own team, the hours that they are having to spend just justifying their right to be in the UK. Those who are EU citizens, those who are Commonwealth citizens, and those, given my work, who have come with refugee background. And the number of times they hit a set of assumptions at every level of government, public life, employment, where people just think because maybe they have an accent that doesn't quite sound like they might have been here from birth, or maybe they have a skin colour that isn't white, that they will be subject to checks which are about forms of racial profiling and asked to do things which are actually illegal to ask people to do. And what that then does to people on a daily basis, how that then changes their comportment and their sense of themselves. And I've seen it with those who are non-UK EU nationals within my own institution. I've watched extremely good leadership from our Vice-Chancellor, from our Principal, Anton Muscatelli, in taking and leading a decision to cover the cost of the settlement for those who are non-UK EU nationals. And I've seen a number of other organisations doing that across Scotland, which is really to be welcomed. But at the same time, the real uncertainty that it's bringing for the UK university sector, the Russell Group put out a statement this week just saying a no-deal Brexit will be absolutely catastrophic for the generation of knowledge into the future, and the kinds of knowledge that might actually lead to wisdom, and the kinds of knowledge that are part of forming the thinking that those who become our decision makers at all levels of society need in order to be able to make good, clear, astute, non-panicky decisions. And I think we're seeing a stage in our history at the moment where that's in real deficit.
Aye, definitely one of the reasons why we're living with this. Well, it's ad hoc, politically.
It's government off the cuff. Basically, since 2015, where there was a year lead into the Brexit referendum, we've effectively got a government that just on a week-to-week basis governs, but under the radar actually passes some really dodgy, dangerous legislation, which gets absolutely zero press coverage, zero scrutiny, because Brexit is the only thing that gets focused in that Parliament. So whether it's the bedroom tax, which people in Wales and England still pay, the rape clause, welfare cuts, nonsense,
universal credit,
universal credit, these things are all happening under the radar, not the people that they're impacting on, because they're causing some real damage to people and communities across Scotland and across the UK, but there's just no scrutiny. Because when you try to, when the SNP, Plaid, when various Labour backbenchers try to scrutinise the government on these issues, the debate's shut down because there's something more important, and that's Brexit. And until we actually get away from this Brexit nonsense, I think that's going to be the sad situation as United Kingdom politics.
Yeah. And just in terms of the deployment of the people in the civil service as well, we've actually just seen a real movement of civil service work to focus on what Brexit might be, which of course then means that all kinds of other things are being pushed down the river and will happen at a later date, or are being shelved, or are being postponed. And so I think I've seen it just in my own work again and again, waiting for or expecting a decision to be made, told when a decision will be made coming out of a UK government, and then we get a postponement and another postponement. And that then has a knock-on effect on all the work that we do. And that's just in one small area of teaching and research within a university, but that's replicated across the country so that people are in reacting mode rather than a place where they're saying, okay, and the next good decision or the next good step to take will be this. It's that's somehow frustrated, and people are then in a place where that frustration boils over, and we see it boiling over a lot. And that we haven't really spent a lot of time, partly because we maybe haven't needed to as we've been part of the EU, on trying to think, how do we carefully live with conflict in civil society between each other? How do we live with people we disagree with? How do we find a way of understanding and being with difference and disagreement? Because we've had other structures to hold that, and we've had a degree of confidence in those structures to do it. And when that goes, we've really got to start to capacitate the whole of civil society, our political class, our educators, to actually live with a very conflictual set of situations and to know how to offer wisdom and guidance in that situation. And that's no easy task, and it's no quick task, and it's certainly not a task for 60 working days.
Yeah. Well, 60 working days for normal people, of course,
that's right.
Because parliamentarians go home on a Thursday. So.
Exactly. And I think with that, where I drive hope, because I can feel us all sagging into it's a new year and it's only the 6th of January, and already that sort of despair's starting to seep in. But I take a great deal of hope at the moment from two constituencies. One is young people. Mm-hmm. I see a remarkable savvy and energy and wisdom and political engagement in young people. I was listening to Greta Thunberg speaking about climate chaos, and she was absolutely remarkable. But her point where she actually said, you have failed us. You have not had the maturity to make the decisions that are necessary on climate change to safeguard our future. And I think I'm hearing young people saying the same to me around Brexit, particularly students saying the same about the future and their concern, and actually wondering whether or not it's possible for them to take leadership, for them to grow a constituency, for them to start to think about what it might mean, for them to not live with the securities that my generation have had, certainly, but to have to live with a very different set of circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I find it quite ironic, of course, because the biggest constituency of people that voted to leave the European Union were the post-war generation, to saw firsthand what happens when you've got European unity, of course, on the back of European disunity. So I suppose you're right, there are reasons to be hopeful, but ultimately I think we're going to be here this time next week, this time next month, even into the summer, who knows how long, until we basically make a decision. Are we going to leave the European Union, or are we staying in the European Union? And if we do leave the European Union, what terms do we leave under? And ultimately that's going to be the catalyst for later on this year, the Scottish independence debate coming to the fore of Scottish politics.
This refugee crisis that we have, I know you wanted to speak about it. Is it a crisis?
Yeah, I mean, this language of crisis is quite emotive. It is a crisis. It's a crisis of hospitality, and it's a moral crisis. But in terms of figures, in terms of what we're actually dealing with, this is something that is of a completely different order. So I think it's maybe worth us just looking at what the figures are around what's actually happening. So I was reading over the excellent free movement blog that the barrister Colin Yeo puts up regularly, and he was just rehearsing some of the statistics that we have from the International Organisation for Migration and the UK's own statistics around the numbers, and then the statistics for across the European Union, and it's just really interesting. So maybe 100 people a month over the last maybe 3 months have been entering the UK on boats. There's always been a little bit of that kind of travel, and a lot of tourists have entered the UK in that way as they've been sailing, and these are very, very small numbers. In terms of actual claims for asylum in the UK, in 2017 there were 30,000 claims for asylum. That's tiny. That's absolutely tiny. That's maybe around the population of some of the towns in Inverclyde that you're responsible for, Chris. This is not a large number of people. In Germany it was over 222,000 people claimed asylum in that year. In Italy, 128,000. In France, around 100,000. So just in terms of our European partners, these are tiny figures that reach the north. And that reach the countries of the north. The majority of people do claim asylum where they arrive, but they're not required to do that by law. Our international obligations are not that refugees claim asylum in the first country they arrive in, for very good reason. They may have other claims, they may have other places to be, they may have family in other countries, and many of the people that I met in the camps in Calais were just desperate to be with family members in the UK, and actually had a legal right to make that request under things like the Dublin Convention and the Refugee Convention. So whilst some of our UK politicians, and particularly those in government, and especially the present Home Secretary and the present Prime Minister, might like it to be the case that people claim asylum in the first country they arrive in the UK, it isn't actually legally binding. And so the production of a crisis, the performance of a crisis, fits again into what I was saying before about this maritime imaginary where we've got a man on a boat looking tough. It's like Ruth Davidson on a tank looking tough. It's like Margaret Thatcher on a tank looking tough. These symbols are really powerful. We know how powerful they are because we saw the vile propaganda used in the Brexit campaign that actually replicated posters used throughout history, particularly to create a fear of the other, of the foreigner. We saw those images, those long lines of people that are designed to create fear, but in which and where sometimes we see the production of politics, the sudden closing of a border, designed to create imagery like that can then provoke these deep images of fear that people have. So there is a crisis, but the crisis is of a completely different order.
But like many of the Brexiteer arguments, it doesn't actually stand up to scrutiny.
No.
Let's say, for example, that Theresa May's Brexit deal gets through Parliament and we leave the European Union. What difference does that make to people coming on a boat from France into the United Kingdom? Absolutely no difference whatsoever. And you're right to say there is an actual crisis. There's a humanitarian crisis across the world. Refugees, you're an expert of course, but it's totally different in different parts of the world, whether it's economic or warfare. And of course in many conflicts we've actually got a hand. We're actually at the doorstep that have created the reason that we've got such mass migration. And then when people have the audacity after their villages and their towns and their homes being bombed to migrate into Europe and come to our doorstep, all of a sudden we're affronted. But I think as much as it's distasteful to me, and I think it's really wrong, when we've got the resource and we've got the ability to take more refugees, and of course we should, I think we need to actually start addressing some of the issues that did result in across the UK. That I think immigration was one of the key points for why people wrongly, who were misinformed, voted to leave the European Union. I think people that have grown up in that post-war environment, jobs for life. You could have a job in the factory all your days, but now Johnny Foreigners came to my town and he's taking my job. It's simply not true, and again, it's a lack of wisdom and leadership for politicians, scared to take on the arguments. It's globalisation, it's a new tech age economy. That's why jobs are going to places like Singapore and Taiwan, and we've just not been able to compete. And that's the real argument, because our government have sold off our assets, they've failed to invest in manufacturing, they've failed to invest in infrastructure, and the failings of the government then become the failings of communities. And it's easy for government to blame foreigners, it's easy for government to blame migrants and immigrants, because that stops people actually putting the blame where it should lie, and that's at the doorstep of the government. And that's the real tragedy here, of course, from a British perspective.
One of the things, I mean, research shows that one of the things that people do when they are fearful, they don't look up for who to blame, they look down for who to blame. They look at the next place where they're afraid they might end up too. And so, you know, we're seeing this with the EU settled status issue. You know, much of what the Home Office are actually requiring has been tested time and again on asylum seekers and refugees. You know, these questions of how much you pay, these questions of how many forms you fill out, they're all part and parcel of what has been a package of measures which are highly contradictory and often very incompetently used, which led to the Windrush scandal, which has led to the situation with settled status, where we just know that people are going to be refused. People who've been there for years. We see the heartbreaking story of people where, you know, they're saying, my parents have lived in this country, you know, with me for 50 years, they're in their 90s, and now they have to apply for settled status and pay the 60 odd pounds that it costs and fill out the very many forms. And I think that this level of lack of understanding of what this takes was really brought home to me recently when I was travelling. I was doing some work in Kenya, and I'd arrived in Nairobi, and I was standing in the queue for my entry visa, and there were 3 guys behind me from the UK, and we had a one-page sheet of A4 to fill out with the usual stuff, you know, what's your aircraft, where did you land, and where have you come from, what's your passport number, date of birth, when are you leaving, when are you and how long are you here for. That's sort of basic information. And I heard them speaking behind me, and I kind of felt a bit sorry for them, but they said, do you know, this is an outrage that we have to fill out this form. Anybody from this country coming to the UK doesn't have to fill in any forms at all. And that statement was then made. And I then just turned around, and I'm afraid, you know, in the 45-minute queue, they ended up with my 101 seminar on elements of immigration, visit visas, and what the actual huge bureaucratic burden is on people for actually entering the country and what that actually means. And I think, you know, for me, that was then a real eye-opener that this is where we really need good education around what the situation is, who comes, why, what the issues are around that, but also just to get away from this discourse of people taking jobs, this discourse which actually requires high political leadership and the kind that we have seen almost cross-party within Scotland, where Nicola Sturgeon time and again has said, you know, you have honoured us by making Scotland your home. She hasn't said you're great contributors, she hasn't made it all about economics, she's actually said you've honoured us by making this your home. And of course, as all women know, through years of being expected to be homemakers, actually what happens is that people who are making a home are doing a very different set of work to people who are involved in having a job. And so that wider work of making a home, that often gendered work of making a home, is really important and really significant.
But I think that's why it's important, because the question would be who's next. Over the last century, first the Irish people, they should go home because they're stealing their jobs, then we had the African members that came off with the Windrush scandal, then it was the Asian community, then it was the Eastern European community, and all that's coalesced towards the Brexit debate. And when we leave, because I think we're going to leave the European Union, when we leave, that's why it's important to have that debate, because that'll just move on to someone else, whether it's going to be, we see in the newspaper today, the Jewish community in Scotland and in Britain feel that they're not welcome because of the xenophobia they're facing. And if we're not willing to have those tough arguments for why our economy is broken the way it is, and it's actually not somebody else's fault, I think we're going to just see this repeated. And as we were discussing earlier on, it moves on to the high street crisis. Again, it's always someone's fault, but the reality is it's a global economy in the way the world's moving. I don't I mean, I don't go into shops very often and buy stuff anymore because you buy it online. And for as long as that's the way people are going to move, then that's going to damage high streets. But I think what's key there is, where does the profit go? And that's where the debate, I think, has got to be in kind of post-Brexit Britain, where we're going to have more control over things. Does that profit go to shareholders, or does that profit get reinvested into the workforce? Because that's what causes that great divide there going forward.
And I think that actually brings us on to that, that aspect that was brought up and highlighted on Friday this week of, what was dubbed Fat Cat Friday, where we've actually seen that in the first 4 days of the year, those in charge of the UK's biggest companies had already made more than many of their employees will make in the whole year. So it points back to this, what's produced by gross inequality. Is fear of others, is scapegoating of others. This has been true throughout history where we've seen this, and that actually in terms of really addressing this, then the work that has gone on from people like Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson in their wonderful work in the Spirit level, where they actually did the research and looked at where is it that people have ended up where is it that inequality has happened, and what has that actually done to societies? What's it done to rates of morbidity? What's it done to elements around, for example, teenage pregnancy? What's it done to the fabric of society? And they looked at how that inequality was mapped and saw that the greater the income discrepancies, the greater the fear and the greater the rates of morbidity, of early teenage pregnancy, all of these things that we see as indicators of an unhealthy society will be exacerbated by us having great inequality. And that then that's informed an awful lot, that research has informed an awful lot of very good policies from the centre into the left, and particularly within the Scottish Government over the last 10 years.
But those themes are exactly the inequality, the economy, the centre-left versus the centre-right. That's been exactly the debate that the last Congress election had. And of course we've just seen the swearing in of the, I forget what number it was, maybe was it the 96 Congress? Somebody will correct me, no doubt, on Twitter on that. And it's been dubbed the most diverse Congress in the history of the United States, and quite rightly so, because there are some characters, if that's the right word, and there are people from a real diverse background, and there's a lot of women in that Congress as well, which is going to bring quite an interesting dynamic, considering some of the language that's been used under Donald Trump's presidency over the last couple of years. But I think one of the interesting points is that I think the Democrats are really overplaying their hand on this one, because it really plays into Donald Trump's hand, because losing control of the Congress means that he can then start blaming the Congress for his failings, and that plays exactly into his key constituents, and we've seen that at the moment with the Build the Wall campaign, and it's working, because in the Republican heartlands, it's the exact sort of debate we're having here in Brexit. Somebody else's fault, my steel factory shut down because of foreigners, because of immigration, because of Mexicans. Well, actually your steel factory shut down because it's just cheaper to manufacture steel in China, and the company you work for decided to basically sell up and strip all your assets and ship all the work abroad. That's it, and Mexicans did not play a part in that role. So it'll be really interesting to see how this Congress shapes up going forward. Yeah.
And again, I think in this Congress, I found it actually really moving watching the swearing in, and I think, partly seeing, the two former refugees, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, being sworn in. That's an extraordinary contribution that those women are making from their histories, and what that brings, and the diversity that brings to decision making, the understanding and empathy that can bring to the moral crisis that much of the world is finding itself in at the moment. And then seeing Deb Haaland and Sharice Davids, the two Native American women, being sworn in, and seeing them hugging, it was a really moving moment to see what it means when you are part of a long, enduring history of oppression and of loss of land and loss of rights and of broken promises. And to me, it's people like them that we need to look to find the wisdom that we need as we look at a set of broken promises, a lack of faith in the decision making and the competence of the delivery of Brexit, but also of the way in which the treatment of refugees is being handled worldwide, then people who have long understood what it means to lose your land, long understood what it means to bear with the situation of injustice, that those qualities and that you saw in that moment are really important. And then, you know, of course, the 29-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and, you know, her amazing dancing.
Yes.
You know, that was just, you know, just such a beautiful moment, and such a moment that again points for me to what we were saying about youth and the energy of youth and the possibility of youth and youth leadership and youth saying this is what it can look like.
She's a very, very interesting character indeed, because I don't think you'll see in UK politics or probably American politics someone that's basically just walked into the House of Representatives, but they're actually setting the agenda. And you know, I think the Republicans in America are a lot smarter than the Conservatives in this country. They put massive spotlight on her, whether it was the dance routine, which actually plays into her constituency, because she's a New York Democrat. She's got a massive social media following, she's got a massive youth vote, so that's going to actually personally help her. But it's putting spotlight on her, it's given her a massive profile, because the Democrats in America are really struggling at the moment. Elizabeth Warren's launched her presidential campaign, and to date our campaign slogan is winning back for the middle class, which I don't know if that's the message that's going to beat Donald Trump. But AOC, Cortez, she's got a key policy at the moment that there should be a 70% tax rate for high earners. Absolutely. So the more spotlight they put on her and the more she gets to then enter the media world and promote her arguments, I think that's going to be quite an interesting debate, because I don't think America certainly is ready for a 70% tax rate, which ironically that was the rate under Ronald Reagan when he came to office. But I should point out that she's talking about 70% for people that earn over $2 million. It's not £100,000 or £60,000. And it's actually, I think, going to start quite... The reason I think we're talking this is because we accept that American politics and that economic policy impacts the rest of the world and comes all the way here to Scotland. The argument behind the 70% tax rate is it would encourage chief executives of companies that are on $8 million and $10 and $50 million. Well, they actually need to keep money in their company and invest in their company, because what's the point of drawing out massive salary if you're going to pay 70% tax on it? I need to grow my company, because then of course we know they cheat tax via share dividends, so the best way to then make profit is by making the company more profitable, which means they need to invest in the workforce, which means workers end up with higher wages, better terms and conditions, and that's how the fat cat chief execs, as we refer to them in Britain, they make their money that way, through the company doing well. So I mean, it'll be quite interesting, because we don't have these debates in Britain. I think the last 2 years, again this year, we've been having a debate on whether people earning over £50,000 should be paying an extra 1%. People over £40,000, 150. That's the sort of areas we're talking in. We're talking about fine margins, which absolutely raise a lot of money for public expenditure. But we're certainly not having a debate in this country about something radical like a 70% tax rate.
And yet we need a radical debate on tax. I mean, and it's interesting again, as I review the last year, and you know, as also as part of that, looking over finances, I realised that I thankfully pay more tax this year than I would if I lived in England. And that is exactly as it should be, because I really want a government to be trying to do what it can with money I pay in tax to tackle homelessness, to make sure that everyone has food and shelter, to stop us having to have people using food banks at the rates that they are doing. And to me, taxation is a really good system for doing that. It's a real privilege to pay tax. And as a public servant, as somebody in public life, as somebody who is a professional, as somebody who benefited from a university education, I absolutely believe I should be taxed well and fairly and justly, and that collectively that money can actually start to address some radical issues for social change. It's what's happened in the past, it's what the welfare state was founded on, and it's what worked for us for a very long period of time. And if we're to continue to have a welfare system in the UK and not move to a situation much more like the American situation, and then taxation is one of the things we will really have to tackle, and tackle well and tackle justly. And I think, you know, for me, if I walk down a street and I actually see we are starting to reduce homelessness and rough sleeping and starting to reduce the number of people using food banks, I'll be really pleased.
Well, I think that in Scotland, I think many people understand the concept of a social contract.
Exactly.
And we're talking about you pay more tax this year, but the majority of people in Scotland pay less tax in Scotland than people in England.
As it should
that's
be.
because we've got progressive taxation.
Yeah.
And of course, it could become more progressive, and I do support that. But I think we're taking the right steps to make it in a steady pace. And of course, people that earn more pay more. And as I said, we've got that social contract. And I think people, they accept and they respect that, well, I don't pay £9,000 a year in tuition fees in Scotland, so when I go on and I become a professional, that social contract, whether I work in the NHS and pay back to society, or I go on to earn very high wages thanks to that education I got, then it's right that I pay a bit back. So that we're talking about homelessness, social care, because at the end of the day, you can't sustain public services without a reasonable rate of taxation. Exactly. And I think in Scotland we're actually setting the way for the rest of the United Kingdom. And I think, again, talking about 70% in America, but as part of Derek Mackay's budget this year, at the moment he's not passing on the tax cuts that the Tories have gave to people in England, which will lead to massive cuts in public services. Of course, that budget, I think we'll be talking about that in weeks to come.
Absolutely.
Whether that gets through, the implications that'll be, because we're talking about elections and Brexit. Ultimately, if the Scottish Government don't pass a budget, we could end up with another Scottish Parliament election. And I think if you go and knock 10 doors in Scotland, you're not going to get a single person telling you they want an election. No. So that'll be an interesting one for the players in Parliament here. Yeah,
and I think within that as well, there's something very interesting about the difference between some European countries and the way that their taxation rates work and then our own. And I've often heard it said that in the UK we want European level services, but US level taxes, and you can't have that. When I spend a lot of time in Germany and I see there the different levels, both of devolved democratic structure to really local levels with real power of decision making and good decision making, but also see many of the public services that we look at with envy. And I know that they're funded through progressive taxation, and we are asking ourselves that question, and Brexit was an answer to that. It was a marginal answer to that. It was only 52% on that vote, and certainly not in Scotland. The answer was very different in Scotland. In Scotland, largely what we said was we like what we see in Europe. We like that. We want to move in those directions, and we're seeing ourselves moving in those directions to have high levels of public service and to have progressive taxation in order to deliver that. And in England, we see a very different set of decisions and decision making, and I think that's going to be, again, is going to continue to be a major part of what we're discussing at societal level. And so Brexit ends up being a presenting issue about how do we share our bread? That big, deep question, that big philosophical question, how do we share our bread? It's a moral question, it's an economic question, it's a question of neighbourliness. How do we share it?
While we have been discussing on here that there has been an issue of a release regarding sharing, but the rollout of universal credit, apparently there's a pause been put on a rollout of 3 million, and we're down. It's going to be seeking approval for just 10,000 rather than 3 million.
Is it?
I think it's across the UK, across the whole of the UK. This has just come out while we've been talking here.
Well, that's something we've been calling. Inverclyde's got near enough. We were one of the guinea pigs in Scotland and across the UK, and we see firsthand whether it's a whole host of tragic issues, such as people having to basically steal, which is going back to Dickensian type times. It's people, there's been front page stories about people starving themselves to save money. Mental health has had a massive impact. People waiting 6 weeks, 8 weeks for really an amount of money that I don't know how anybody can survive on. And that's exactly why we've been caught. In theory, of course, a system that brings together all these complicated benefits makes sense, but the way the Tories and the UK government have handled it has been a shambles, like most other policies, and absolutely there's a halt. That's welcome.
Has it already been rolled out across Scotland?
There's not been full rollout across Scotland. I think the city of Glasgow, I think it's actually January. I think there's rollouts due. Inverclyde, something like 4,000 people have already been transferred onto universal credit. But it's got so many unintended consequences, such as, because universal credit's different for your legacy benefit, people starving themselves. That's because there's school kids in Inverclyde no longer eligible for free school meals, but they've actually got less money under universal credit. And so there's all these little cracks in the system that universal credit just makes things even worse. And I think that the decision is to pause universal credit or cancel it completely and go back to the drawing board and think about something else, and absolutely we need to do that. But going back to the Brexit point, when's Parliament going to find the time to debate these very, very important issues of the day when we're spending all our time at the moment debating Brexit?
Yeah. I mean, this is really welcome news, and actually a gentle sign of wisdom. Actually slowing things down, pausing things, giving people time to have the kinds of debate that are needed, enabling people to be deployed on really looking at what the utter misery has been in those areas of Scotland where universal credit has been rolled out. And certainly when I speak to my own parliamentary representatives about the issues that I see on a regular basis, because I am alongside refugees and asylum seekers, alongside disabled people who are suffering absolutely unconscionable levels of hardship in 2018, 2019, in the fifth richest country in the world, that we are absolutely putting people out on the street, that parents are choosing to go without meals so that their children can eat again, I never thought I would live in a country where that was necessary, and seeing that happening, then there's real wisdom in pausing this and a number of other things that we need to tackle, so that we can actually genuinely think with the right parts of our brain. There's all that research that's been done around when you're in panic mode, you think with the areas of your brain that really aren't well suited to making good, clear, deliberative decisions. And we really need to be able to use good structures of decision making. We need to use our democratic structures well. And what we see again and again is that we've not been able to do that within the Westminster Parliament. The Prime Minister being found in contempt recently, the suspending of the votes, these are unprecedented, where we're setting aside these deep democratic instruments that are actually designed to hold us in times of crisis. And rather than using the instruments that are there for times of crisis, what we seem to be doing is making decisions based out of crisis thinking, emergency thinking, which is never good. You can never make a good decision in a crisis. I remember reading and doing some good leadership training a while ago, and being told, in any crisis situation, and we'll all be there, about whatever decision you make, about 80% of it, if you're lucky, might be okay. But after that, you've got the 20% to deal with, which is the fallout, because you can't make a fully reasoned decision in a crisis. So then you'll be dealing with that 20%, and your decision there will be an 80% with a 20%. And so actually, we really need a bit of a pause on, yes, universal credit, that's fantastic if we're pausing that rollout, but on a number of other things where we need to just slow things down and think carefully and cautiously. And again, it's where I've seen leadership from the Scottish Parliament across parties in taking time, in learning to debate, in slowing things down, and in repeatedly coming back to those important issues, like Alison Thulis's work on the rape clause, not letting it go and saying we need to rethink this.
Yeah. So we're down to our final topic, which is it light-hearted? I don't know. New Year's resolutions, it being New Year. I don't even know whether you have any or not.
I had a New Year's resolution last year, and for the first time ever I kept it, and it was to not use a self-service checkout.
Okay, very good.
Which, there is a place for them, because people with maybe autism and sensory issues like to be able to go in and not have to interact with people during quiet hours in some supermarkets, which is a good thing. But again, it's back to automation. So if you go into a supermarket, and I worked as a trolley boy when I was 16, and you used to have maybe 16 or 18 people, mainly women, then, still today, actually mainly women, low paid jobs, but again jobs, and now you go into a supermarket and you look, maybe you've got 2 or 3 people there, because it's the queues are at the self-service checkouts. But again, where does that money go? It creates more profit for the supermarket, but the money that automation causes, and Jimmy Reid spoke about this in the 1970s, about automation and the big challenges that would have to workers and profit margins, and automation effectively means that profit goes to the company and gets divided between shareholders. Jobs get cut, but the workers stay on the same wages that they're on, and what we see is that gap between the richest and the poorest grows, all thanks to automation. And that's why I think it's a really boring topic for some people, but it's really important, because whether it's Amazon basically dictating how people shop and what people buy these days, or Tesco killing or high streets across Britain, we really need to understand that if we want to have these technological advances, we've got to make sure the profit that they help us generate gets reinvested in jobs, creates new jobs, and ultimately drives us wages up. So that was last year's resolution, and I managed to keep it for a full year. This year, my resolution is to campaign for Scottish independence every single day, and hopefully that will be another success story.
I hope it is.
I really love that resolution that you had last year. I think it's actually quite similar to one that I had last year, which was about just really resolutely shopping locally.
Yeah.
And chatting to people. And I had during the time of the Beast from the East, I remember popping into the local spa shop, and it was snowing like crazy. And I just said to the guy who we'd been chatting a lot, and just said, "Have you got anywhere to stay tonight? Because you can't get home." And I knew he lived somewhere on the south side. And he said, "Oh, I'm just gonna get a blanket and sleep at the back of the shop." And I said, "Well, no, you're not. You're closing up shop now, and you're coming home and you're staying overnight with me." And that's actually just led to something really lovely out of that. Just lovely, different conversation and chat, and just realising, talking to the local shopkeepers and just shopping a bit locally and buying my pint of milk, not in a big supermarket, often with tax breaks overseas or goodness knows what, or contributing to this Fat Cat Friday. So but I really like the idea of using that automation.
I also like shop local because ultimately it's the local economy I'm helping. If I go to my local butchers or my local greengrocers, which to be honest you're lucky if you find a greengrocers these days, it keeps that money in the local economy, and it gets spent improving your local economy. But again, get back to the self-service. It's against the law to sell too many paracetamols to a person because they could have an overdose or tragically commit suicide. It's against the law to sell alcohol to an alcoholic. Exactly. How does self-service put checks and balances in? It doesn't. So you could basically keep going and buying and nobody stops it. Whereas human interaction, and particularly in a generation where we've got more people isolated and lonely in older age, that's actually the only conversation some people have, is the shop they go to, the shopkeeper that's been there for 20 or 30 years. And do you know that what everybody's favourite comedy show, Still Game, they done a comedy sketch on that, about the woman gets in and all of a sudden the conversation's gone. And I think as we've got we've got a gap between the richest and the poorest in society, but we've also got that generational gap, that more and more people are living longer and less people are being born. And that's something we really need to address. If automation is going to be the way forward, again I was talking earlier on about the high street, if younger people keep buying online, more high street shops shut down, what sort of interaction do older people get? I mean, that's why the bus pass is so popular, because for many people it's just about getting on a bus journey to talk to somebody. And at the moment, thankfully, we don't have driverless buses, so we've still got that interaction with a bus driver. But that's a big challenge, I think, in the next 20, 30 years to come.
I think, for me as well, the best thing that happened to me in 2018 was that I became a grandmother. So our foster daughter had a child, and it's just been the most beautiful experience. And I was terrified because I'd not had kids of my own. And then thinking, I don't know what to do, and how do you look after a baby? And then just thoroughly enjoying it. And I think that, for me, has changed so much, so many ideas about, what does it mean? And how do you then just continue, rather like you saying you're going to continue to campaign for an independent Scotland, for me it's also about just continuing to campaign for a world in which human rights are respected and where my granddaughter and everybody else's children can grow up in freedom and in a flourishing society where we have enough, we have what we need, that we don't try and race after greed, and that we are able, I think, to learn to, and this is what I think the framework for human rights gives us, is to allow every human being to live with dignity. And for me, that's also in this fractious space and debate, is about saying how in every interaction I have can I try and bring dignity into that space, because it's severely lacking. And what does that mean? How do I bear with that? What's my bearing to be? How do I comport myself in situations which are difficult, which are maybe demeaning, where people I care about and love are being abused in terrible ways? How do I bear with that? And how do I learn from people who have done that in the past, like the Congresswomen that we were speaking about before, who've learned so much the hard ways and have put themselves in that space?
Can I thank you both very much for coming and talking to us
Thank
today.
you, Carol.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
And we'll hopefully see you again at some point. Thanks. Thank you for watching.